The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk as Daniel Foster stepped out of the taxi, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, military boots thudding against the dry concrete. He hadn't told anyone he was coming home early, it was meant to be a surprise. He'd imagined his little girl running into his arms, squealing with joy, his wife crying happy tears. But the moment he laid eyes on the house, his excitement began to crumble. The front yard, once neatly trimmed and lined with his daughter's painted rocks, was now overtaken by waist-high weeds. The white paint on the porch was chipped and peeling, and the flower pots his wife used to tend were bone dry, cracked open like forgotten memories. One of the shutters hung crooked, swinging gently in the warm breeze. Daniel's chest tightened as he climbed the creaking wooden steps. He noticed the porch light bulb was broken, blackened at the center, and a spider had spun a thick web over the doorbell. He pressed it anyway, then knocked. No answer. He hesitated, then reached into the small tin can hidden behind the third flower pot, right where they'd always kept the spare key. It was still there. Inside, the air was heavy. Dust hung in sunbeams like floating ash. The welcome mat lay crooked, and Lily's backpack, pink with glittery unicorns, sat abandoned by the door. Daniel called out, "Hello. I'm home." But no sound came in return. No footsteps. No laughter. His boots echoed as he moved cautiously down the hallway. The living room was in disarray, blankets crumpled on the couch, dishes piled in the sink, and the faint smell of mildew hanging in the air. A juice box lay flattened on the floor near the TV. Daniel's heart began to pound harder. Something wasn't right. He had returned from war expecting warmth and welcome, but instead, he'd stepped into silence, into a home that no longer felt like home. As Daniel moved deeper into the quiet house, every step felt heavier than the last. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was eerie, unsettling. He passed the family photo wall, once filled with joyful snapshots, Lily's toothless smile on her first day of school, a beach trip from years ago, a family selfie at Christmas. All of it now coated in dust, forgotten like everything else around him. A soft shuffling noise echoed faintly from the kitchen. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He set down his duffel bag slowly and crept forward, muscles tense. Could someone be in the house? He hadn't seen any signs of forced entry, but the disarray, something just didn't sit right. He reached the doorway to the kitchen and paused. The sound was clearer now, a faint crunching, like someone chewing something hard. He leaned in, expecting to see maybe a pet scurrying around or some forgotten appliance still running. Instead, what he saw made his breath catch. Lily, his daughter, his precious 7-year-old girl, sat cross-legged on the linoleum floor. Her hair was tangled and matted, her pajamas wrinkled and stained. In her small hands, she held a handful of dry dog food. And she was eating it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Daniel stood frozen, eyes wide, heart pounding. For a moment, he couldn't even process it. His brain tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Maybe it was a game. Maybe she was just pretending. But no, she was chewing, swallowing, reaching for more. The old metal dog bowl sat in front of her, half filled with kibble. Beside it, a tipped-over cup. No toys, no plate, just a little girl trying to feed herself the only way she could. His voice cracked as he finally stepped forward. "Lily." She looked up. Her eyes were tired but calm, as if this had become normal. There was no fear in her face, just quiet resignation. She blinked at him and said with a hint of confusion, as if wondering why he looked so shocked, "Hi, Daddy. You're home early." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Nothing in his years of combat had prepared him for this moment. Daniel dropped to his knees, the duffel bag forgotten behind him. His heart was pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from the sheer disbelief of what he was witnessing. His daughter, his sweet, lively Lily, who used to giggle at pancakes shaped like animals and run around the house in fairy wings, was sitting in front of him, quietly chewing dog food like it was her daily meal. "Lily, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice trembling, almost a whisper. She blinked at him, her eyes large and unblinking, and shrugged softly. "I was hungry," she said. "This is all that's left." Daniel stared at her, stunned. For a long moment, he couldn't find words. Everything around him blurred, the outdated calendar on the wall still turned to a month ago, the sink full of dishes crusted with old food, the empty cereal boxes stacked beside the trash bin like they were waiting to be reused. How long have you been eating this? He finally managed to ask, gently moving the bowl aside. Lily looked at him, confused by his concern. Since the cereal was gone, she answered simply. Mommy said not to open the cans 'cause they're for emergencies. She glanced toward the pantry. But the dog food was open. And Max didn't want it anymore. Daniel's throat closed up. Max. Their old golden retriever had passed away over 6 months ago. She continued, I made sure to chew really slow, so my tummy doesn't hurt. It's not bad, kinda crunchy. She offered a faint smile, as if trying to reassure him. Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. He tried to keep them in, but one escaped down his cheek. How had things gotten this bad? Where was her mother? Why hadn't anyone noticed? He reached out and pulled Lily into his arms. She didn't resist. Instead, she rested her head on his shoulder and sighed, as if this was the first time in days she felt safe. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. Daddy's here now. I promise, no more dog food. Ever again. Lily nodded sleepily against him. Okay, can we eat something warm now? Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. Yes, baby. Anything you want. Let's find something real. Daniel gently stood up, still holding Lily in his arms. She clung to him, her little fingers gripping the fabric of his uniform as if afraid he might disappear again. He carried her to the worn-out couch in the living room and wrapped a thin blanket around her small frame. She didn't say anything more, just rested her head against his chest and closed her eyes, exhausted not just from the day, but from all the days she'd spent fending for herself. Once she was settled, Daniel headed straight to the kitchen again, this time with purpose. He opened the refrigerator, hoping, praying, he'd find something, anything that resembled real food. The door creaked open with a low moan, and a wave of sour, spoiled air hit his nose. Inside, the contents were grim. A half-empty milk carton sat on the top shelf, its expiration date a faded memory. Daniel twisted the cap and immediately gagged at the rancid smell. He set it aside, trying to keep calm. Next to it, a shriveled apple sat in a bowl with a puddle of brown liquid beneath it. A container of yogurt, green with mold, and a plate with a dried-up piece of something he couldn't even identify sat next to it. There was no butter, no eggs, no meat. The pantry wasn't much better. He opened cupboard after cupboard, empty cereal boxes, crumpled wrappers, a single can of corn pushed into a corner. Everything else was either expired or already opened. The flour had weevils, the bread had turned to stone. He found a cracked jar of peanut butter with a spoon still inside. Judging by the size of the spoon, it hadn't been Lily eating from it. Daniel's hands curled into fists. His military discipline was the only thing keeping him from throwing something across the room. His daughter had been living in this. Alone. Starving. He turned around, scanning the kitchen for any sign, any clue as to where his wife might have gone. A dirty coffee mug sat on the counter, lipstick smudged on the rim. There was a broken phone beside the sink, its screen shattered, useless. A pile of unopened mail, bills, mostly, was stacked beneath it. Overdue notices. Final warnings. Eviction threats. He went to the trash and flipped open the lid. A few fast food containers were crumpled at the bottom, greasy and cold. But they were dated. The receipts showed a week-old purchase. That was more recent than Lily had said her mother was last home. Daniel's heart sank deeper. Something wasn't adding up. Someone had been here not too long ago, but had clearly chosen to leave. And left Lily behind. Alone, hungry, and forgotten. Daniel stood in the center of the kitchen, his mind racing. He gripped the edge of the counter, staring at the pile of unopened mail as if the envelopes could speak and tell him where his wife had gone. The walls felt like they were closing in, and his breath grew shallow. None of this made sense. None of it should have happened. Then, behind him, Lily's small voice floated in from the living room. Mommy said she'd be back before it got dark. He turned quickly and moved to her side. She was still curled under the blanket, her big eyes fixed on the ceiling like she was talking to it instead of to him. When did she say that? Daniel asked, crouching beside her, trying to keep his voice steady. She didn't look at him. 3 days ago. A pause. No, maybe 4. I was wearing my unicorn socks, and I only wear those on Saturdays. Daniel's stomach dropped. She packed a bag, Lily added softly. She said she had to go talk to someone about money. I asked her if I could come, but she said no. She gave me a hug and told me to watch cartoons and not open the door. Then she left. Daniel sat back on his heels, trying to process it. His wife had left their daughter alone. Not for a quick errand, not for a few hours, but for days. Days. A child who should have been laughing at school or running through sprinklers in the yard had instead been scavenging for food, living in silence, and eating dog kibble just to survive. "Did she call you?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Lily shook her head. "I tried to call her, but the phone didn't work anymore. It just makes a weird sound." She mimicked a dull tone. Daniel glanced at the cracked phone on the kitchen counter. It must have broken before she left, or maybe she took another one. Either way, there had been no contact, no check-ins, no safety net. Lily had been completely abandoned. "I thought maybe she forgot the way back," Lily whispered, her voice smaller than ever. "So I waited and kept the porch light on like in that storybook you used to read. But it stopped working too." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes again, but he forced himself to stay calm, for her. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and kissed her forehead. "She didn't forget you," he lied gently. "But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long time before whispering, "Promise." He nodded slowly. "I promise." Inside, though, he was burning. With rage. With confusion. With guilt that he hadn't been here when Lily needed him the most. But that was over now. Whatever had happened, whatever reason his wife had for walking away, it didn't matter anymore. All that mattered now was making sure Lily would never be alone again. As night began to fall outside the house, Daniel sat in the dim living room, the only light coming from a single lamp flickering uncertainly in the corner. Lily had finally drifted off to sleep on the couch, her head resting in his lap, her breathing soft and even. He gently brushed her hair back, watching the way her face twitched now and then in dreams. She looked peaceful for the first time since he'd arrived. But Daniel's mind was anything but calm. He reached for his phone, hands trembling slightly. With a quick glance at the broken one on the kitchen counter, he confirmed again, it was completely dead. Useless. He tapped the contact for the local police station and listened to the phone ring, every second stretching longer than the last. A dispatcher picked up. Daniel explained everything in short, direct phrases, military precision returning to his voice even though he was barely holding it together emotionally. "My wife has been missing for at least 4 days," he said. "Our 7-year-old daughter has been left alone in the house. I just returned from active duty deployment, no one notified me, no one checked in on her." He gave the address, his military credentials, even offered to stay on the line. An officer was dispatched immediately. But as he ended the call, a wave of helplessness washed over him. How had this gone unnoticed? How could an entire neighborhood, a whole community, miss the fact that a child was fending for herself? He stepped outside briefly, needing air, needing answers. The sky was painted in streaks of purple and orange, but the house felt colder now that the sun had set. He walked across the yard to the nearest neighbor's house, a tidy home with wind chimes rattling on the porch. An older woman answered the door after a few knocks. "Oh, Daniel," she said, blinking in surprise. "You're back." "I am," he said, forcing a polite tone. "Mrs. Turner, have you seen my wife recently? Or Lily?" The woman looked awkward, glancing behind her like she wanted to escape the conversation. "Well, I saw your wife about a week ago." She seemed stressed. "We didn't talk much. I heard some shouting, maybe last weekend, but I figured it was just the usual couple stuff. I didn't want to intrude." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Did you see Lily outside? Or check on her?" Mrs. Turner's face turned pale. "No, I just assumed someone was home with her." "Someone wasn't," Daniel replied, his voice sharper than he intended. "She's been alone, eating dog food." The woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God. I had no idea. I should have knocked. I thought." But thinking wasn't enough. Daniel thanked her and moved on to the next house. Same pattern. A neighbor had seen the car drive off. Another heard crying but didn't follow up. Everyone had noticed something, but no one had acted. No one had stepped in. He returned home just as the patrol car pulled up, blue and red lights flashing softly. He looked back at the house, his daughter sleeping inside, her innocence cracked by days of neglect, and felt the weight of every silent bystander on his shoulders. The world hadn't just failed Lily. It had abandoned her. The flashing lights of the patrol car painted the front of the house in waves of red and blue. Daniel stood on the porch as two uniformed officers stepped out, their expressions shifting from routine professionalism to concern the moment they saw the look on his face. He introduced himself quickly, voice controlled but tight with emotion. "Sergeant Daniel Foster. Just returned home from deployment. My daughter's been here alone for at least 4 days. Possibly more." The older officer, a woman named Deputy Holloway, nodded and pulled out her notepad. "Is your daughter safe now?" "She's asleep. Hungry. Exhausted. But safe. She's 7 years old. Her name's Lily," Daniel said, motioning toward the front door. The younger officer moved to the doorway and peeked inside while Holloway continued taking notes. "We'll have social services looped in by morning. Do you have any information on your wife's whereabouts?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Only what my daughter told me. She left days ago, said she was going to talk to someone about money. Took a bag. Didn't come back. I have no idea where she went. And no one thought to check on Lily." The deputy scribbled furiously. "Do you know if there's a history of instability at the home? Domestic issues, financial problems?" Daniel hesitated, then exhaled. "We argued before I left. Things were hard. Money was tight. But I never thought she'd just vanish. We were supposed to be partners. She promised to take care of Lily while I was gone." Inside, Lily stirred and murmured his name in her sleep. Daniel glanced back toward her, eyes softening, before turning back to the officers. "She's been eating dog food," he added quietly. There was nothing else. Deputy Holloway's expression darkened. "That's neglect, plain and simple. We'll file the appropriate report. The Department of Child Services will likely interview both of you. But don't worry, we're not removing her unless there's immediate danger. And from the looks of it, you're doing everything right now." Daniel nodded slowly, though his shoulders remained tense. He wasn't afraid of interviews or scrutiny. He was afraid of what his daughter had endured while the world moved on around her. After the officers left, promising follow-ups and paperwork in the morning, Daniel locked the door and walked back to the living room. Lily was still curled under the blanket, her small form barely rising and falling with each breath. He sat beside her quietly. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy, it felt necessary. He studied her face, so peaceful now in sleep, and wondered how she had survived the loneliness, the hunger, the fear. He thought about all the nights he had spent overseas in hostile terrain, worried about landmines and ambushes. He had imagined danger halfway across the world, not in his own living room. He'd trained to protect civilians, defend the helpless, and somehow, in trying to protect his country, he had failed to protect his own child. A wave of guilt crashed over him, but it was met with a stronger feeling, determination. He went to the kitchen, turned on the stove, and began preparing a small meal from the little he had salvaged from the pantry, some instant oats and honey. It wasn't much, but it was warm. It was real food. When Lily woke, he'd be ready. Not as a soldier, not as a husband, but as the father she needed, someone who would never leave her side again. Morning sunlight seeped through the threadbare curtains, casting a golden hue across the living room. The house, though still quiet and in disarray, felt somehow different now, less haunted, more alive. Daniel sat at the edge of the couch, watching Lily stir beneath the blanket. She blinked her eyes open slowly, confusion clouding her gaze at first, until they landed on him. "Daddy," she whispered, voice raspy with sleep. "I'm right here, baby," Daniel said gently, brushing her hair from her face. Lily sat up, rubbing her eyes. "I thought maybe you were a dream." Daniel pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "No dream, sweetheart. I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere." In the kitchen, the oatmeal he'd made earlier had cooled slightly, but he reheated it quickly and brought it to her in a chipped bowl. She took it eagerly, eating without hesitation. He watched her closely, memorizing every movement. She looked more alert today, less pale. But there were shadows beneath her eyes no child should have. After breakfast, Daniel dressed her in one of her cleaner outfits he found buried at the bottom of the laundry basket and combed her hair as best he could. She flinched a little when he got to the tangled parts, and his heart broke with each wince. How many days had she gone without even this small gesture of care? When the knock came at the door just before noon, he already knew who it would be. A caseworker from Child Protective Services, a woman named Ms. Alvarez, introduced herself and stepped inside with a clipboard and soft eyes. Lily shrank back behind Daniel, but he knelt and whispered, "It's okay. She's here to help. You don't have to be scared." Ms. Alvarez asked her some gentle questions, mostly about what she'd been eating, how long she'd been alone, and when she last saw her mother. Lily answered them with a mix of honesty and caution, but she never let go of Daniel's hand. "I've seen worse situations," Ms. Alvarez said privately to Daniel after the conversation, "but this is still serious. The abandonment, the condition of the home, it's not your fault, but it'll be a process to stabilize everything. We'll assign you a temporary guardian status until your full custody can be reviewed. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm not just prepared," Daniel said firmly. "I'm committed. I'll do whatever it takes." He wasn't a perfect man. He'd missed school recitals and bedtime stories while serving overseas, trusting that everything at home was fine. But now, after everything, he realized the mission ahead of him was the most important one he would ever face. He started making calls that afternoon. To family members, to a lawyer, to his former commanding officer, letting him know he wouldn't be returning to active duty, at least not anytime soon. His place was here now. Later, he took Lily to the park down the street, the first time she'd been outside in days. She clung to his side at first, hesitant and unsure, but after a while she began to loosen. She smiled, even laughed when he pushed her gently on the swing. That sound, pure, bright laughter, was the first hopeful thing he'd heard since he walked through the front door. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel looked down at her and saw something remarkable: resilience. His daughter had endured something no child should have to face. But she'd survived. And now, with him by her side, she would thrive. From that day forward, Daniel treated every moment like borrowed time he was earning back, every meal cooked, every bedtime story read, every nightmare soothed. His tour of duty might have ended overseas, but the real mission, protecting Lily, rebuilding their life together, was only just beginning.